Have you ever really stopped to think about how a website takes your clicks, your text, your uploads, and somehow turns them into clean, usable, and secure data on a server? I mean, it's one of the most fundamental and frankly hardest problems on the web. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most elegant systems ever designed for this exact purpose, Django Forms.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the core problem that Django's trying to solve. Then we'll get into the tools it gives us, from the basic form all the way to the superpowered model form. We'll see how it runs data through a validation gauntlet, how it manages whole collections of forms at once, and finally, how this entire system is actually a built-in fortress of security for your app.
So before we can really appreciate just how brilliant the solution is, we have to understand the problem. And trust me, it's a big one. It's all born from this fundamental disconnect between what happens in your browser and what happens on the server. I mean, really think about this. When you hit submit on a form, you aren't sending these nice, neat Python objects over the wire. Nope, you're sending a stream of text. So how on earth does the server make sense of that text, learn to trust it, and turn it into something it can actually work with? And this right here, this lays out the conflict perfectly. The browser world is kind of chaotic, right? It just sends everything as a string. There's no inherent type, no state. But our server world, it's the complete opposite. It's built on a foundation of strict data types, objects, and order. Django Forms, well, they're the bridge that's been expertly engineered to span this massive gap.
So, how do we even begin to build that bridge? Well, Django gives us our primary tool, the humble yet incredibly powerful form class.
The best way to think about this is, if a Django model is the blueprint for a table in your database, then a form is the blueprint for the data you expect to get from a user. You just declare the fields you need, like, say, a char field for a name or an email field for an email, and Django starts to handle the rest.
Okay, now this is a really critical concept to grasp. Every form instance you create actually lives one of two lives. At first, a form is unbound. It's just a blank template you show to the user. But the moment they submit data, a new bound instance is created, tying their data to your form structure. That is the one you can validate and process. Understanding this unbound versus bound distinction is absolutely key.
All right, this is where the real magic happens, because getting data is one thing, but making sure that data is clean, correct, and safe, that's a whole other ballgame. And Django's approach is this rigorous, multi-stage process I like to call the validation gauntlet. You know, when you call that simple isValid method on a form, it looks like you're just flipping a switch, right? But what's happening under the hood is anything but. You are kicking off an entire pipeline designed to systematically scrub and verify every single piece of data that came from that user. The key takeaway here is the order that this happens in. It's a funnel, moving from the most specific to the most general. It starts at the field level. Hey, is this actually an email address? Then it runs your custom logic for that specific field, like, is this email already registered? And finally, it validates the form as a whole. For example, do the two password fields actually match? This layered approach is what makes it so unbelievably robust.
And the very first thing that happens in that gauntlet is normalization. Before any other checks, Django tries to turn that raw string into the proper Python type you want. This is huge. It stops a massive universe of potential errors right at the front gate. It means your application code only ever has to deal with clean, properly typed data.
So we've seen the fundamentals, and they are already super powerful. But let's be real. In most apps, your forms often look exactly like your database models. To avoid all that repetition, Django gives us a power tool that perfectly embodies its don't repeat yourself philosophy.
So you could do it this way. You could define your form field by field, meticulously recreating the structure you already defined in your database model. You specify the type, the max length, all of it. And yeah, it works. But man, is it redundant.
And this is the model form way. Look at that. Instead of defining every single field all over again, you just point the form to your model. It looks at the model's structure and automatically generates all the fields, all the labels, and even the basic validation rules. It's less code, which means fewer bugs, and a single source of truth for your data structure.
But it doesn't just build the form for you, it also knows how to save it. The save method is smart enough to handle creating or updating the object in the database.
And with this commit equals false flag, you get this incredible power to hit a pause button on the process, add extra data that didn't come from the user, like the current user's ID, and then finish the save. It's incredibly useful.
Now, this architecture is amazing for single forms, but how does it scale? What happens when you need a whole collection of them on one page? Like editing line items on an invoice or something.
Well, the answer is something called a form set. You can just think of it as a manager for a whole group of forms, treating them all as a single unit. This is the absolute key to building those complex grid-style interfaces where users can add, edit, and delete multiple records all at once.
The real secret sauce behind all this is an invisible piece of machinery called the management form. It quietly adds a few hidden fields to your HTML that track things like the total number of forms. This is how the server knows exactly what to expect, even if you're using JavaScript on the front end to dynamically add or remove forms. It's a simple but brilliant way to keep everything perfectly in sync.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk security. Because in Django, forms aren't just a utility for handling data. They are a core part of the framework's security model. Protection isn't some add-on. It is baked into the design from the ground up. First up, Django provides world-class protection against cross-site request forgery. That's a nasty attack that tries to trick a user into submitting a malicious request without their knowledge. To stop this, Django automatically injects a hidden, unique token into every single form. What's amazing is that this token is also masked and re-scrambled on every request, which defends against even more advanced attacks. And it doesn't stop there. Because the forms system is so tightly integrated with the database layer and the template engine, it automatically prevents the two most common web vulnerabilities, basically for free. Data is always safely parameterized, which stops SQL injection, and any user-submitted data is escaped by default before it's displayed, which neutralizes cross-site scripting attacks. And just in case you're thinking this is some old, dusty system, it's not. It is constantly evolving. Recent updates show a clear commitment to modern web development. The default rendering now uses divs instead of old-school tables, and the new as-field-group method makes it easier than ever to integrate with modern CSS frameworks in a component-based way. This quote from the source material really just says it all, doesn't it? Django forms aren't just a single feature. They are a complete, synthesized architecture. They seamlessly blend powerful validation, flexible rendering, and ironclad security into one incredibly cohesive system. And that really leaves us with a final, provocative thought. When your server-side framework can handle data with this level of intelligence and security right out of the box, how does that change the way we should be thinking about building our user interfaces? What new possibilities does that unlock for the future of the web?